We live in a truly terrifying time, where the stories of Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, and Alton Sterling are ones that are all too well known and happen far too often. On July 17, 2014, Eric Gardner was killed in New York by Officer Daniel Palanteo. Eric Gardner was put into a chokehold by the officer while being placed under arrest. His last words were, "I can't breathe." Less than a month later, on August 9th, 18-year-old Michael Brown was gunned down by Officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. His death was the catalyst of many riots within the city and caused the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement. Fast forward to July 5th, 2016, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where Alton Sterling was pinned to the ground and shot by officers Howie Lake II and Blaine Salamone. While a bystander recorded the incident, Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, and Alton Sterling were all killed within the span of 2 years. But what of the officers responsible for their deaths? For Daniel Palanteo, members of the Gardner family argue that he should be fired by the department and should serve jail time. But the case's review board has yet to determine his fate. As for Darren Wilson, he is no longer a police officer. However, when he went on trial, he was not indicted. For officers Howie Lake II and Blaine Salamone, federal agents have decided not to bring charges against either officers. These killings were not justified, and unfortunately, they are not the only ones. To state this very bluntly, police officers in this country are killing people, and they have been for years. It's not 3 people every 2 years or so. It's more along the lines of hundreds and nearly 1,000 per year. And we are able to see this trend thanks to DeRay Mackeson's police accountability tool. This is an extremely serious and very prevalent problem that affects the entire nation. And as a nation of people who rely on the police to protect and serve within the communities that they live and work in, we must hold them accountable for their actions. We must hold them to a higher standard. If we don't properly regulate, investigate, and reform the police, they will continue to kill the civilians whom they are sworn to protect. We must police the police. To do so, Congress and the Federal Bureau of Investigation should investigate and reform police departments across the country, because there are far too many incidents where police have killed civilians and they are not properly investigated nor punished. The issue of police encounters ending in death is one that is prevalent across the country. And although the deaths of Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, and Alton Sterling were isolated incidents, they are all a part of an epidemic and they need to be treated as such. There is a common theme with most cases of police brutality and killings that are brought to the grand jury. This theme is all too familiar, and so much so that it has become predictable and normalized. An officer is caught on camera beating or killing an unarmed individual, and in recent years these have been videos of black males. The video goes viral due to a hashtag of the victim's name underneath the video. The response: the country is in a brief uproar debating the officer's actions were justified. The police department affiliated with the incident makes a statement to investigating what happened. The media becomes even more divided, and some argue that this is an isolated incident and thus a state matter. On the opposing end, many argue that there is something fundamentally wrong with how this country addresses the matter of police brutality and killings. The officer may or may not go on trial, and they may or may not give a statement that they feared for their life, but they often do. And because they felt their life was in danger, their actions were justified. Then they are given paid leave. Then the Black Lives Matter protests begin, and the Black Lives Matter counter-protests begin. And while there may or may not be a riot within the city where the incident took place, within 2 to 3 weeks, the viral video is seen less and less, and the argument dies down and eventually forgotten about. And more often than not, the officer is found not guilty. From there, the officer returns to the original department, or they are asked to resign and end up working in a different department, as was the case for Officer Lohman, the man responsible for killing 12-year-old Tamir Rice. From there, it's back to work, while those who are forced to suffer in silence, then another video goes viral with a eerily similar hashtag attached, and the cycle continues. Why is this theme of repeated police negligence a reality that we all must come to terms with in our everyday life? Well, in my opinion, this is due to a lack of supervision and accountability. And due to this lack of supervision of law enforcement, officers are committing acts that they know are wrong, but often believe they will not be held accountable for. I feel that there is a sense of superiority or a belief that they are above the law, and for the officers who commit this act, most of the time, they aren't held accountable. So, what can we do to solve this problem? Firstly, we must abolish the narrative that police officers are domestic saviors. They are human, and therefore they are just as susceptible to committing horrendous acts as any of us. Secondly, we must regulate police on a federal level. We can no longer afford to classify the actions of police as a state matter. The problem is, we as a country must take accountability for the officers in each and every city and county across the country, not just in prosecuting them. But we also have to demand that our congressmen and women and our governors implement laws that crack down on police violence, brutality, and killings. Luckily, many cities have already taken similar actions. Currently, there are 8 policies that have shown a decrease in the number of police killings as according to Campaign Zero. These 8 policies are as follows. The first requires officers to de-escalate a situation before resorting to force. The second, limit the kinds of force that can be used to respond to specific forms of resistance. The third, restrict chokeholds. The fourth, requires officers to give verbal warning before using force. The fifth, prohibit officers from shooting at moving vehicles. The sixth, requires officers to exhaust all alternatives to deadly force. The seventh, requires officers to stop colleagues from exercising excessive force. And the eighth, requires comprehensive reporting of the use of force. To accomplish this, we have to start by holding states officials accountable. For now, misconduct within the police department is treated as a state matter, so it must be fought at the state level. If there are any hopes for change, write and call your governor, mayor, and police chief to encourage them to start adopting all 8 policies to end police brutality and deaths. But don't stop there. Make it a point to find, participate, and organize protests and events within your community to not only raise awareness of this epidemic, but to fight it as well.